everyone. Welcome back to Enjoy the Book of Life. We're here again with Brother Dave Dunlap to talk about one of his books and really build off of our topic from last week. So turning it over to you, could you tell us a little bit about your book called No Little Places and the inspiration behind it?
So the background to the book and the inspiration for the book is that I was involved in church planting, and as I said in the previous podcast, um, in 5 different places, and from the very beginning of my Christian life, and I learned some things along the way. Slowly, I picked up things here and there from other workers, from other experiences, and and in my own life in a number of places. And I always wanted, there are many books that are doctrinal books on the church,
Mhm.
excellent books that are doctrinal books on the church, but I didn't feel there are any books on the practical side of how do you go, and apply these principles in a local church. How do we do that? And how do I get in a very encouraging, but bit of an encouraging book with
Yeah.
some illustrations and some ways to go forward and to say to a person, to say to an elder, say to a number of believers in a local church, the local church doesn't have to be big. It it but it has to be healthy, and
Mm.
it will eventually grow, maybe not big, but it'll grow to be healthy, a healthy size. And when I say no little places, I'm not speaking about 5 people in a local church, but I'm thinking of 30 or 40 people that can be involved, maybe 25 people, depending on the size of your town that you live in.
Right.
And that's a big factor, and so forth. So I wanted to put together a book from my experiences and how I had been blessed and what I had learned, and put it into a book, and uh, and that's and that's kind of how it came about. In addition, it during COVID, where we were still meeting on Zoom, but there were no conferences, there wasn't much travel, those kinds of things. My wife said to me, this would be a good time to write a book. And actually, that's what happened. I began to write it and think about it and put it together. And so it pretty much was written during
Yeah. Yeah.
COVID years. Or
So,
year.
how did you structure the book, and what are the big ideas throughout it?
Well, in the very beginning, and I know most people don't read the forward to a book; they just go right by that. But in the forward of the book, I write a little bit about my personal experience. So I write about, as a college student, being saved, going into this local assembly, and it had been originally a Italian gospel hall, and it some people hived off from the original Italian gospel hall. They're all from Italian background, wonderful believers, and they wanted to reach out in a new town about 20 minutes away from the original. And so they did that. So they had 50 or 60 people in their early days. But as time went on, they began to decline in numbers. And so that's around the time that I showed up at this assembly, and the elders were wonderful. One of the elders just passed away at 97 years old a few years ago, and he was a tremendous encouragement to me. I wouldn't be where I am today without the encouragement that he had in my life, and and so forth. He gave me opportunities to speak and to preach and so many other things. I probably had a lot of silly ideas, and he was patient and allowed that. And but I learned a lot there. And we began to do evangelistic things. We did my home Bible studies, events, door to door, and the work began to grow. On one occasion, we baptized 25 people in one baptism
Oh,
service.
wow.
Uh, it was just remarkable. and others came along and helped. And soon after that experience, I went to Belgium as a missionary in 1983. So it was a good foundation experience for me. I was saved in college, but for 5 years, I was in that assembly, 4 or 5 years. And so anyway, that's the preface. A little bit about that. How elders in a local church, small, wasn't a big local church. It was a small local church that had a tremendous life transforming effect on my life.
Hmm.
And so it can have that. A small church has amazing potential. And don't look down upon your situation if you're in a small church.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in an unhealthy small church, that's another thing.
Hmm.
If you're in a dying small church and things can be done, well, that's another thing. And so I felt I want to write a book on just some principles that I've learned over the years, and some encouragement and some practical aspects about it. So the book begins, first couple of chapters are I think the first chapter, I dare you to get involved in a small church. And I talk about the fact that God has always used small things. God has always used
Right.
uh, 12 disciples. God has always used Noah and his family to start a new world. God has always worked through small groups. Now, he has also worked through Israel and as the church began to grow, but he's always worked through small groups over and over again. Back in the days of Gideon.
Yeah.
Gideon had 32,000 soldiers, not trained, not established, uh, not experienced warriors, but 32,000. And he said, that's too many.
Yeah.
And so the Lord said, send those who are fearful of heart, send them back. And I think 22,000 went back. He had 12,000 left or 10,000 left. He said, those with you are still too many. And eventually he said, he in effect said, I want to work with a small group,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I'm going to do a great thing through a small group. So, um, so I began to speak about that in the first couple of chapters, how God loved to use small things and small groups, and He loved to use a small assembly. Not that a larger assembly is not loved by Him or not used by Him, but He loves using small groups because He does it all through Scripture.
Hmm.
So I begin in a couple of chapters talking about that, and just the idea that there's tremendous and amazing potential in a small church.
Well, one of the things I really appreciate how you structure the chapters is each chapter is broken into smaller chunks. They're real digestible chunks, just a couple paragraphs. And so for each topic that you have, it's they're little bite-sized pieces, and it keeps you moving through the book. So I really appreciated that with how you structured it, like you said, with those personal illustrations. But it really does. It keeps you moving. The chapters aren't. Yeah, you definitely don't. I don't get lost in a chapter. It's not too long, and it keeps me moving through it. A really easy read, enjoyable read as
I
well.
Yes, I wanted them to be small chapters. All my books, I feel they should be small chapters. When you get beyond 6 pages, people get a little lost on them. 6 to 8 pages. You don't have 20 page chapters; they're just too
Right.
long. And the book should be relatively short. So I structured it in, the first part about don't be discouraged if you're in a small church. In fact, I dare you to go and be involved in a small church because it might have the effect that it had in my life. It might be a
Yeah.
life transforming thing for you. So I say, I dare you to get into a small church because a small church, you'll have opportunities to lead people to the Lord. You'll have opportunities to lead a home Bible study. You'll have opportunities to preach. You have all kinds of opportunities, and that's going to stretch you and that's going to cause you to grow. So, and then I speak about the amazing potential of a small church and and all those kind of things. And then I get into a number of different areas that I think are important in a small church. And so you go through some of those principles, mostly in a practical way, maybe a little bit of a doctrinal way, but mostly in a practical way.
Yeah.
And then in the end, I have a number of chapters. In one case, 16th Avenue Chapel in Vancouver, how they reached out to Asians and Chinese especially through English as a second language, and how they have had as a small church have had remarkable worldwide really blessing uh, through reaching Asians through ESL. So uh, vision and creativity and looking to the Lord, how small churches can just do great things. Um, so that's a little bit of the structure that the book has.
No, well, you were speaking about going and participating in a small church. I thought of a friend of mine. He got saved while he's going to school here at Mississippi State here in Starkville, and then for his work, he's an aerospace engineer, and there aren't a lot of places where you can go and do that. So he ended up in Tulsa at the assembly there, and it was such a good, it was a strong work, really helped him grow in the saints there, really took him under their wing and helped mature him while he was there. Well, then uh, everything kind of seemed to be chugging along, and then he gets let go of his from his work there, and he ends up in Georgia, and he finds himself plopped into this very small assembly in Georgia, and I think it was just the hand of God where he put him first in Tulsa, an enriching place where he grew and developed. But now that he's in this smaller work, he's having to he's doing some of the preaching, he's leading some of the studies, and so he had some real encouragement. But now he's being an encouragement to the saints there, and just to see the growth that he's gone through while he's been in that small work, it has been really encouraging to see.
That's excellent. I think that will be the experience of a serious Christian. If a serious Christian is in a small work, he will grow. He'll be stretched, and He'll grow more than he can ever imagine.
Yes, yes. So, if you were to give someone a little taste, some of these lessons you've got in your book, you've got 24 chapters, again, shorter chapters. And you talked about kind of the introduction, and then after that, you get into these practical or a practical look at life in a church. If you were to give someone a little taste, what's one or two thoughts from these chapters um, that that
Well,
you would give?
I think I think each chapter is important in its own right. I think uh, some of the chapters are written maybe a little bit for a leader or
Hmm.
someone who's a serious Christian. Others are for the everyday believer. But I think um, I touch on I think all the many of the areas of a local church. I talk about a prayer meeting, and I call that no more casual prayer.
Yeah,
And I try to think about how we could be more effective in our prayer and how we could be more participatory and more we could get more involved in our prayer time and how that could be rich, not the most boring time in the week of the church. It shouldn't
right,
be that way.
right.
I don't think I feel like in some places I don't think the local church should be the way it is. I
Mm,
feel it should be different. And I don't know if we could be exactly like the first century church, On the other hand, I think we can be much like it, and I think it should be different than it is today.
Mm,
And when you're in a small church, a thriving, healthy small church, I think you can have a lot of that, where
yeah,
the church is fluid, where the church can respond and change on a moment's notice
yeah,
to a need or to a situation. If you say, "Hey, well, let's start a lot more discipleship." Just had a conversation with a brother in our assembly. Said, "Why don't we do a lot more discipleship than we're already doing?" And I've got some ideas on that. So we can pivot and we can do that in a smaller church. Now we're over 100 people. We can still do that because we're a new church, a young church, and we've done that a number of times.
hmm,
And so that's an important thing. Some churches don't change, don't want to change, not willing to change, maybe can't change. I'm not sure. But we are always thinking about ways to involve more people, to get more ministry, get more evangelism, get more prayer, get more discipleship, and all those kinds of things. So some of the chapters I think that are important and I think encouraging. Um, I'll just point out a couple that I think are important, and they're all important. I think all the 24 I think make their point in one way or another, and some of them were not written by myself. I took them from other sources and put them into the book, but for the most part, they are from my experience.
hmm,
Now, one of the chapters I have in the book is a chapter that I didn't write, but it helped me in the very beginning. And that's a chapter by Francis Schaeffer. And it's not really even a chapter they wrote, it's a sermon that he gave, a very
okay,
significant sermon that eventually was put into print form and then became kind of an anchor chapter in a book that he wrote. And it's called No Little Places. And I have it, I think it's chapter 4. And um, it's really kind of the heart of what I'm trying to do in the book. And so I've included that in the book. And I encourage you to read that. It's a really tremendous, it's
yeah,
very different than Francis Schaeffer's philosophical kind of work that he's done. Here he's writing on the church. And and he's a Presbyterian background. But as he begins to write, you begin to see the truths he says in that relatively short chapter are very, very important.
yeah,
And um, so that's an important chapter. I think, um, and I think chapter 5 is very important, and that's called shared ministry in the local church.
mm,
So I really believe that's a very important thing. I am sort of like a church planter. The church I've been at this local church for 23 years, and it started in my home, and I've been with her from the beginning. I either know most people for a long time, or the new people I know them, and I've been in the lives of I think everyone in the local church, and so we have in our assembly we have a believer who was saved on the mission field, and we saved through a missionary in Brazil. He's actually an elder in our assembly, and as we talk, he has a certain way of speaking about my role from the mission field. And it probably this is not doesn't happen probably in many other places that I know of, but he says to me sometimes, he says, "Dave, you know what you are? You're the missionary. See, you're like the guy who came in to my town as a missionary and led my family to the Lord, and then I got saved. And he was the missionary, and he came and he had a certain about a leader, not the pastor. You're the missionary. You've started it. You've done some other things. You're equipping others. You're mentoring others. Now, in North America, some people will come to me and say, "You're the pastor,"
right,
because you're a bit of a leader, and you might do a certain amount of things that pastors do. But he says, no, no. He says, "You're the missionary," and that's a very good distinction. And I think we should have more missionaries
Mm.
that that come in and do the kind of work that I do. And maybe I'll move on one day, and maybe we'll hive off one day. I'm not sure what will happen in the future, but I'm just the missionary. So we have a shared, and I'm part of that shared work. So where there's a shared ministry of the word, and elders, I believe, take up a larger bulk of that teaching because they're the teachers, they're the leaders, and in that teaching, I believe elders develop something very important, and I call it spiritual authority. If an elder is not teaching, an elder is not presenting the word of God, he's not going to develop spiritual authority. And what that is when someone in the congregation uh, has a question, has a problem, has a spiritual question about scripture, they're going to go to the elders
Hmm.
and go to them because you're ministering to their life. They're growing through your teaching. They look to you as an authority in their life. And that's a very important thing. So shared ministry is a very important thing that believers in the local church go to these different ones and go especially, I think, to the elders because they're going to have the dominant amount of teaching. We have other men, very good men, who will do a fair bit of teaching too. But they either haven't chosen, don't want to be an elder, and that kind of thing. But so there's a shared ministry, and in that there's shared doctrinal teaching, there's shared topical teaching, there's shared home Bible studies. There's different ministries, different aspects that we're involved in, and we get as many people involved in that as possible. And we talked about that in our session about church planting.
Hmm.
So very important to have that shared ministry.
Good, good. Now, where could someone, if they wanted to purchase uh the book, No Little Places, where could our interested listeners go to find it?
You could go to Gospel Folio Press and purchase it online there. Um, you could probably purchase it. I have copies, purchase it from me personally. And and there may be other places too that if you're another country, you could purchase it through Ritchie in Great Britain and places like that. Um, so you can purchase it. Probably you maybe even be able to find it on Amazon. I know some of my books are also on Amazon, but I would recommend that you go to Gospel Folio Press and their website, and you could find it there.
I'll make sure to put a link in the description
Okay,
for it there.
sure.
Um, and then if this is an area of deep interest for any of our listeners, we've been talking 2 episodes now, really focusing in on the the development and the planting of these groups. And so if this is their interest, they've got this book as a resource from your experience. What other resources or areas of focus would you recommend from your experience? What other things would really help them in this interest?
So outside of the book,
Yes, sir.
well, I would say I would say to get involved. I would say get involved in a local church, get involved in a smaller local church, and don't be afraid to do that. Now, when you get into a smaller local church, first of all, think of this: if there are elders there, um, uh, think of doing this, and you might not want to do this, and especially a young person. I think seek to uh, honor and respect the elders in your local church.
Mm.
Um, and get the confidence of the elders in your local church. And when you get that confidence, and they know that you're not going to do something that maybe that they don't feel is correct, but once they get the confidence Once they get confidence, then the door can be opened to a lot of different areas. And so that's one of the first things I would do, is be faithful, be helpful, um, fill roles that no one else is filling, and be come to all the meetings, participate at the Lord's Supper, and just be encouraging. Sometimes people come in and try to tear things down right away or whatever. Uh, that I wouldn't do that. Um, I wouldn't do that. I would get the confidence of the elders, and then I would go ahead. And you'll learn a lot in that process. And as you learn, um, you may think as a young person you know everything that there needs to be about having a successful local church, but you might be able to learn some things from the elders and from others, and just from experience. And that'll be the first thing. And I think there are uh, you can learn a lot from other books. You can learn a lot from um, uh, there's a great little book I might recommend, and called God is Real, and that's the book on the life of Richard Haverkamp. And Richard Haverkamp was involved in church planting for 30 years. And he has a number of wonderful stories about, and a little bit about his life, but mostly, I think, experience.
Hmm.
And now, in different areas, if it's preaching, there's books on preaching, of course. If you want to do evangelism, books on evangelism, and all those kinds of areas. But be a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
um, get books on what God is doing and how he's working in this generation. Um, and I think um, those are just important aspects. I think I'm not sure in different areas. Of course, listeners will come from different areas, but in our area, I think as you get involved into the work of the Lord and begin to reach out, um, you will find that the local church will be very multicultural, multi-ethnic, I believe. Um, so if you're to come to our local church, you will find the first language of many of the believers be 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 different languages. Their backgrounds will be different. They may be from India, different provinces of India. They may be from Jamaica, they may be from South America, Brazil, Argentina. Um, just there might be a few longtime Americans like myself, even in the congregation. But for the most part, many ethnically diverse and racially diverse people. But you can embrace that. We have international nights. We have international food. We have international music. We have music that some of the believers sing from their own countries, whether it be Malayalam or another Indian language, or Spanish or Portuguese. Um, and that's a great thing. I think it's a great thing because African Americans come in. We have Caribbean believers, Afro-Caribbean, and it's everybody feels connected. Everybody's embraced. Everybody's welcomed, and and I say to them too, we all have an accent. You might be from
Yeah.
India, you have an accent. You might be from South America, you have an accent. You might be from Brazil, you have an accent. You might be from the Caribbean islands, you have an accent. You might be from Africa, you have an accent. I even have an accent to them. I may have an American accent, but I have an accent to them. They don't always understand my English, and and so forth. So I encourage them all to get up at the Lord's Supper, participate. I invite them to pray. This past Sunday, I invited a brother who's only been in this country for 4 or 5 years to pray. And he's from South America. And so he's not perfect. There's a bit of an accent, but he did wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful. And so we embrace that, and to say, well, that's this generation. That's where we live right now.
Hmm.
So the people we see coming to the Lord, our neighbor who came to the Lord, she's from the Philippines. And a lot of times people who are coming to the Lord come from different ethnic backgrounds. In fact, many of them that are coming to the Lord now are not fourth or fifth or sixth generation Americans,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
first generation people who, and we've got many first generation people that are coming into the Tampa area and so forth. So um, I would say learn about that, learn about how to reach your generation, and what means you can do that. And we look to the scriptures and see what's in the scriptures, and what are some of the key things that the New Testament speaks about that make up a local church that are very key, and so then we dive into those things and we teach them, and I think when we teach those kinds of things, we will see growth. When we go outside of those things, you may see growth, but it may in the long term not be the direction you want to go.
Right. Right. Yeah, I really appreciate how just answering that question when looking at, well, what other resources, it's like, well, get some experience,
Yeah.
and that emphasis I think is really valuable. Saying, just like your book starts, go, if you're in a small church, you go there, and then you're faithful, you're helpful, and that'll give you that experience that's cultivates that growth.
Mm. Some people think going to Bible college will be the key thing, and I'm not against Bible colleges, but I don't know. I won't say that that's the thing. Um, but I do think just getting involved, fall in love with the church, fall in love with ministry um, in a small setting, and fall in love with the idea that you could lead one person to the Lord and minister to that person, see that whole family get saved and baptized.
Mm,
There's nothing like that.
mm,
Uh, and to uh, see those kind of things, good things like that happen. People begin to grow. Young people begin to grow. People want to go into camp and work on staff and spend their whole summer doing that. Well, they could work at wherever
yeah,
and make more money at it, but they're going to take their summer or go to the mission field or whatever it may be. So I would say there's a number of key things that come out in the book. And I think leadership is very important in the local church. Good leadership, good eldership is very key. And I don't think I have a chapter on eldership, but I have a chapter on shepherding,
mm,
the work that the elders do. So I think that's a very important thing. What is the work that the elders do? How do they do it? And how to go about doing it? How do they lead? And of course, the shared ministry. So eldership, leadership is very key. How do you preach in a small church? That's a very key thing. So I have a chapter not on preaching,
right.
but I think preaching in a small church, and that's a different thing than just preaching. You can get a book on preaching,
Hmm.
but then how do you do that in a small church?
Right. Right. Yeah, again, it's not an area of focus you see a lot of other places. And so, again, from your experience, really zooms in on that, gives you that context, gives you that look. And again, very digestible, uh, practical look at each of those topics. So I really appreciated it, walking through it, reading it, enjoyed it. So thank you so much sharing it, and we'll make sure to put the links in for anyone interested in purchasing it. But again, I really enjoyed how last week's topic and this resource really coupled in together.
Excellent. It's
Thank
my
you.
pleasure being here.